When exploring the old village and land out within Eastern Europe, we would go on to learn of the story behind the mysterious woman known as Mother Miranda, who whilst in her time of grief discovered a mysterious substance she would label as the Black God. In her desperate attempt to bring back her daughter who she had lost to the Spanish flu, Mother Miranda would form a cult worshipping this mold she had found, and use her influence over the village to conduct experiments and hopefully find a suitable host for her daughter, Eva. In this process, however, Miranda would go on to find 4 of the ancestors of that area who once had the right to rule over the people due to their blood links. With this, Miranda would bring them together to form one council to help her rule over the people of the village and put into place countermeasures for her ultimate plan. But on top of this, Miranda would also continue to conduct further experiments on them to see if they would be the perfect host for her daughter. Sadly, these 4 individuals would not be suitable, but with the experiments, these 4 would turn into almost superhumans, featuring abilities never really seen before that were almost extraterrestrial. Now mutated into powerful beings, this allowed Miranda and the 4 to really control the area and make sure everything worked under their rule. These 4 would then be the main turning point for the final chapter of this village's history, as Ethan Winters enters it to hunt down his stolen daughter. But who are these 4 individuals? What is their background? What did they gain from this mold? And what was their ultimate fate? Well, in today's video, we explore the 4 individuals who helped Mother Miranda rule over this village out within Eastern Europe. This is the story of the terrifying, heavily mutated individuals known as the 4 Lords from Resident Evil Village. The year was 2021, and just before Ethan Winters was to enter the village, the 4 Lords would all conjoin together with Mother Miranda within the village, allowing her to conduct her experiments and having council meetings within the cave church about Miranda's ultimate plan. Whilst it seemed like these individuals always worked together, this wasn't actually the case, and for a while all of these individuals were separate from one another. The history of this village goes way back to ancient times and was actually run by the 4 houses that the 4 Lords came from. Being one of Europe's earliest recorded cities, this city was supposedly founded by 4 men who were named in the folklore as Berengario, Lord Caesar, Guglielmo, and Uncle Nicola. Whilst this went well for the 4 at the start, this was to quickly crumble as the city fell witness to an unknown catastrophe, which led to the whole city being abandoned, with some survivors living out within a local village. As time passed and the world went into the 15th century, the rule over the region changed to the 4 houses of Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Moreau, and Beneviento, who were somehow connected to the original founders of this once great city. However, it is unspecific on how closely connected they really were and what their real links were to them. Despite that, with the area now run by the 4 separate houses, these members of the family would massively prosper going into the 20th century, building their families and making the most of the land they now owned. The only change for the area was that the feudal domination the area once had back in the medieval days had now waned over time, as the people were free to do what they wanted without the main influence of the nobility. But within the year of 1918 and 1919, the Spanish flu pandemic would decimate the residents of the village, killing tons of the population, including Miranda's daughter, Eva. This caused Miranda to become suicidal in nature, but when heading to a nearby cave to end it all, she would discover the Black God, and with it, became the prophet for it, as she believed it was the answer to all of her problems. With this transformation in ideology, Miranda became the main influential ruler of the village, as she used the Black God to mutate people around her, initially curing them of the Spanish flu, allowing people to absolutely idolize her and immediately believe what she was preaching. But as she continued to raise her influence within the village, Miranda realized she needed to take things a step further and try to find a suitable host for her fallen daughter. It was time to experiment on the local residents of the village, but with the residents being mostly unsuitable as they turned into lichens or died, Miranda realized she needed to find a better host for this mutation. Here she would look to bring in the once 4 Lords of the region to see if they could be that superhuman host for her daughter, as well as get them to control the residents of the village. And with that mindset, Miranda's new goal had begun, as she started with her process of bringing in the 4 houses, starting with the family of Dimitrescu. Alcina Dimitrescu, the living descendant of Lord Caesar, one of the original founders, was born into the noble Dimitrescu family sometime before the Great War of 1914 to 1918. But life wasn't glamorous for Alcina despite being brought into nobility, as she was born with a hereditary blood disease, which was believed to have been porphyria cutanea tarda. Not much is really known about Alcina's upbringing. However, it is known that within the 1930s during her youth, Alcina was part of a jazz band called the Pool Boys and was labelled as Miss D. This was perfect timing for her and the band, as the jazz scene was rising all throughout the world, and because of that, she was to become a rising star. However, with the Great War now over, nobility would come to an end within most of Europe due to new laws and decisions being put in place, leading to the Dimitrescu rule to essentially come to an end within their land. Despite that, Lady D returned to her family's former lands and forged a new life for herself there. But returning back, she would notice that the whole of the village had now been taken over by the black god worshipping cult led by Miranda herself. Alcina lived in the village for a little while before the year of 1958, but as she reached the age of 44, Alcina would be lured by Mother Miranda to a crypt beneath the village cemetery, as she was to be used for her experiments. When here, Miranda would implant the Cadeau parasite into her to see if she was to become her perfect superhuman host for her daughter Eva. This mutating process was huge, as Alcina went through a giant transformation. Her body grew to heights of over 9.5 feet. She gained incredible regenerative capabilities, retractable claw-like nails, as well as the ability to transform into a dragon-like creature and back again when she needed to. On top of all of this, the parasite also completely halted her aging process and maintained her overall appearance for decades on. But despite these drastic changes helping her to become this insanely powerful superhuman, the mutations did not cure her of her blood disease, causing even further problems for her, where she would need a ready supply of fresh human blood to maintain her health. But with this health problem visible to all, Miranda knew very quickly that Lady D's mutations were a failure, and she could not be a suitable host for her daughter. But with Alcina ruled out of the potential host, Miranda did recognize her ancient rule of the land and allowed her to take residence within the village and to become part of her council, who would ultimately rule over the native peasantry and aiding Miranda in her research. With this acceptance back into the village, Alcina took back her ownership of her family's vineyard and wine distribution business as a means of supporting herself. Now with her noble status back, Alcina relished her new life, and with it developed a new way of thinking that would be the way of extreme caste-based living, where poorer individuals should know their place as lessers and the higher-ups of society rule over everything. The only person that would be on Alcina's level would be Miranda, who would be equal to her, if not just one above her. Now a part of Miranda's council, Dimitrescu gained access to rule within her castle, and within it she would commit acts of the utmost cruelty, taking in regular new staff, bringing them to the castle, and then taking them to the underground dungeon to be killed and drained of all of their blood, so that Alcina could have an endless supply of blood for her own sustenance. Despite stating she would help Miranda with her Cadeau experiments, not much was recorded about what Alcina actually did within her castle to help with the process. However, one event was made of note, which involved 3 women. During this experiment, the corpses of these 3 women were implanted with the Cadeau parasites, and over the course of a week, the Cadeau went on to produce fly-like organisms, which would go on to completely consume the flesh of the 3 women. As they consumed the corpses, they would also go on to gather the DNA information and assimilate with it, causing the flies to mimic their human form and slowly adapt to their likeness. With these new creatures being formed by the Cadeau, Alcina started developing a fondness for these individuals and started to bond with them, giving them the names of Bella, Daniela, and Cassandra, labeling herself as their mother. The 3 girls also developed a fondness for Alcina as well, following her every word and being very influenced by her own actions. On top of this, the 3 were also ageless in appearance, and like with Alcina, were also reliant on vampirism for their own sustenance. But they did have one weakness, and that was extremely cold temperatures, which did not help as the area surrounding was extremely cold, meaning the girls had to stay within the confines of the Dimitrescu castle. For 70 years, Alcina Alcina Dimitrescu and her daughters continued to consume the blood and flesh of the peasants and servants within the local area and just outside of it. The maids Alcina hired would also be used to extract blood, and this blood would be then combined with grapes to create the wine they would label as Sanguis Virginis, a traditional Dimitrescu family wine. This whole process that Alcina went through would go on to create new creatures lurking in the dungeon, with the female victims who had been infected transforming into Morokai and Samka, whereas the male victims would be hollowed out, consumed, and turned into scarecrows for the castle vineyard. There was only one instance of an uprising against Alcina and her daughters, with one villager having stolen a family heirloom, the dagger of Death's Flowers, in an attempt to assassinate her and end her era of terror. The attempt, however, failed as he was buried with the dagger in the Tower of Worship to keep it hidden from any others who might seek harm to her. Alcina Dimitrescu would be one of the most brutal members of Miranda's council, but despite that, Alcina herself would despise all of the other members of the council, as she believed they were lesser than her. Regardless of that, Alcina was just one part of the council, and the other three played a crucial role in Miranda's Cadeau development, with all of the mutations varying from one another, with one individual, Donna Beneviento's, being very odd indeed, as she ruled in her different part of the village. Donna Beneviento was born sometime within the 20th century, with her ancestral links being to Berengario. Like with the Dimitrescu family, their rule on the land was taken away from them after the events of the war. With this loss of their power taken away from them, as well as many other issues within their family, Donna's parents committed suicide when she was just a child. With this affecting her very early on, it became clear that growing up, Donna suffered from undiagnosed mental health problems, including interpersonal anxieties, which kept her extremely isolated from everyone, only feeling comfortable speaking to people through her doll named Angie, which was made by her own father before his death. This most likely fueled Donna's hobby that she would develop going into her adult life, which would be doll making, where she would go on to make many dolls of her deceased family to essentially bring them back to this world. At some point during this, Miranda would either capture Donna or lead her like she did with Alcina and implement her with the Cadeau to once again see what the effects would be on her, to see if she would be a viable host once again. As the experiment went ahead, Donna did not change as much as Alcina Dimitrescu, maintaining her physical appearance completely apart from a mutated eye, and also unchanging her cognitive development. However, one thing did change about her, and that was she developed a psychoactive chemical which could induce extreme violent hallucinations in people. Once again, Miranda was frustrated by these mutations and deemed Donna as another failure and not a suitable host for her daughter. But like with Alcina, recognized her family's ancient rule over the land and granted her access into her council to rule over those below her. This resonated extremely well with Donna, as she would go on to talk about it with her gardener. However, like always, this was only done through her doll Angie, as Donna was never comfortable talking face to face. Not much is really known about what Donna got up to during the years leading up to 2021. However, her mutations were noticed as she used them to develop her own abilities. For one, Donna would be able to divide her Cadeau amongst the dolls she had made in the years prior, allowing her to control them from a distance. This is used mainly for Angie, as she will be used as the main communicator for her. However, other dolls can be controlled if and when she wants, mainly to attack any individual who threatens her. She would also be able to control plants infected by the mold, allowing them to release infected pollen, and when inhaled by someone, they can be given hallucinations that can cause them to lose their minds. But with all of these abilities, this did affect Donna even more, as her mental illness she developed from a young age got worse and worse, almost degrading her brain, turning her attitude into a more childlike mentality and making her absolutely obsessed with her dolls. The only thing that is really known about her is that she remains an incredible doll maker and continues to hide away from most people of the village. It's quite clear that Donna has a pretty tragic upbringing that has affected her mental state going forward. She is clearly the quietest and weakest of the four lords, but that's not to say that she isn't deadly, as she can use her wide collection of dolls to kill anyone who gets in her way. But Donna isn't the only lord that seems to be quiet, weak, and lesser than all of the others. Within the council remains another lord who is treated as a lesser, despite owning an equal role on the council, that member being Salvatore Moreau. Like with Donna Beneviento, Salvatore Moreau's past is very unknown, with the only thing of note being that his family was part of the original 4 houses that ruled the land around them until the end of the war. One can only really guess what Salvatore's past was, as on his arm lies a tattoo of an anchor and a jellyfish with Mother written on it. This would suggest that at some point in Salvatore's life he was a sailor or worked out at sea as a fisherman. This could be backed up by the fact that most of his time is spent near the local waterways of the village where lots of fishing equipment is kept, making it quite evident that Salvatore must have had a passion for fishing and the nautical life. Although due to where Moreau finds himself more often than not within his family's clinic, it could also be shown that Moreau's family were at one point physicians and were highly respected within the community. It is unknown when exactly he was swayed over by Miranda and how exactly he was, but due to his nature and personality, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that he was overwhelmed by the authority of Miranda and her cult, and felt intimidated by her, wanted to be seen as worthy by her, so accepted her invitation to be experimented on with the cadeau. As the experiment went on, Moreau would be transformed into a terrifying and grotesque fish-like monster with multiple eyes, catfish-like whiskers, and a large hunchback taking him over. This appearance was shocking, and because of it, Moreau was disgusted by his own self, developing a personality that was one of complete self-hatred and tending to isolating himself on his reservoir, rarely stepping foot outside to speak to others. Like with the others, once again, Moreau was reluctantly given his seat on the council due to his ancestry, and with that seat on the council, Moreau was desperate to prove himself not only to Mother Miranda, but to the other lords as well, who he looked up to massively, especially our yet-to-be-explored lord known as Heisenberg. On top of this, he would go on to idolize Mother Miranda, viewing her not only as his better and leader, but also as his actual mother. With this mindset, Moreau was one of the most active members of the Lords to work with the cadeau, trying desperately to prove himself to Miranda and experimenting on the villagers all the time. However, despite this, none of his experiments went successfully and frustrated Moreau in the process. At this same time, when Moreau was on his own, he would go on to mutate into a large salamander fish hybrid mutant and would swim around the flooded region, feeding on unsuspecting fishermen for his own nourishment. Like with Donna, Moreau is certainly one of the more reserved and weaker members of the council, and sadly, due to his self-hating nature, not much is known about what he did before or what his real personality is like. But because of his determination to prove himself to the other lords and Mother Miranda, he will do anything in his power to find that successful mutation and take out anyone getting in his or Miranda's way, making him a fierce foe to come up against, even if at first glance, whilst disgusting, he is not all that menacing. However, one of the lords he looks up to the most certainly is menacing, and probably the biggest threat to any outsider as well as the other lords, including Mother Miranda herself. This lord would be known as Karl Heisenberg. Karl Heisenberg is the main patriarch of the Heisenberg family as he continues to expand his family's legacy. Like with the others, sadly not much is known about where Karl grew up or what happened to the rest of his family. However, it is quite clear that Heisenberg himself is a proud and majorly skilled engineer, forging his own weaponry, machinery, and traps for unsuspected guests. Unlike with Donna and Moreau, where it is unknown how they were experimented on by Miranda, with Karl it was noted that he was kidnapped by Miranda and subjected to the cadeau parasite experiment, where she not only wanted to see what happened to him under the influence of its mutations, but to also try and brainwash him into being her servant in the experimentation process. This brainwashing process, as well as the cadeau experiment, was a somewhat success, but Cole displayed some unique mutations which made his skin heavily magnetized, allowing him to control all metals in the nearby vicinity, and almost turning him into a human-machine hybrid who could eventually turn into a giant cyborg. But with this, it became clear to Miranda that once again, he was not a suitable host for her daughter. Once again, he was given a seat on the council and was seen as the intimidating one of the group, even if Alcina did not respect him or even see him as an equal. But Heisenberg was unique compared to all of the other members of the council, the main thing being that he was the only one who objected to Miranda's methods and also held a grudge against her for her selfish ambitions to revive her late daughter at the expense of the villagers, as well as how she saw their family as nothing more than just simply experiments. With this in mind, it didn't take long for Heisenberg to plan a revolt against Miranda, to gain his freedom back back, as well as freeing the village of her rule and experiments. With this in mind, Heisenberg started his revolution and built up an army of cyborganized, reanimated corpses to try and eventually defeat Miranda. Whilst Heisenberg's plan went under the radar from Miranda as well as all of the other lords, his plan only could come to a head in the year of 2021 when Miranda launched her plan to capture the baby of Ethan and Mia Winters, named Rosemary. Miranda, now under the possession of Rose, would split her embodiment into 4 pieces, crystallizing her so she wouldn't perish in the process, and then handing them out to the 4 lords to keep her safe until the ceremony was ready. Heisenberg, being told of this, knew that once the ceremony went ahead, he would be killed, and so now was the time to launch his rebellion against Miranda. Desperate to hunt down Miranda and recover his stolen daughter, the mutated Ethan Winters entered the village and would go on to witness the 4 lords in action. One by one, the lords would fall to Ethan Winters, starting with the blood-diseased giant that was Lady Dimitrescu, followed by Donna Beneviento, and then Salvatore Moreau. Heisenberg, however, tried things differently. Seeing that Ethan had cut down his fellow lords, he tried to convince Ethan to form an alliance with him and use his army of Soldat Moreau against Miranda, but Ethan refused, and because of it, Heisenberg had to take action. With the help of Captain Chris Redfield, Ethan was able to take out Heisenberg, and the counter biohazard team were able to also wipe out his army in the process. The Lord's rule on the land was now at an end, and only Miranda was left, and thanks once again to Chris Redfield, he and Ethan were able to shut her down and wipe out the Black Gods in the process, supposedly ending Ethan in the process as well. Whilst Miranda and the 4 lords were unsuccessful in their ultimate goals, their influence on the land will forever be remembered, as the village would be wiped of all human life. For decades they inflicted pain on all of those around, and because of their actions, horrific monsters were created, but were thankfully shut down by Ethan and Chris Redfield. Whilst their lives and family names have now come to an end, freeing the world from their wrath and tyranny, their legacy does live on, with the joined 4 houses sigil being used as inspiration for the creation of the Umbrella Corporation that would be set up by the British billionaire virologist Dr. Oswell E. Spencer, who worked with Miranda during this era of her cult's rule. With the lords now completely wiped out, the world is now safe from Miranda's selfish goals, but the horrors of what they had done are sure to be told all over as a warning for the dangers of what lurks out there in the wider world. But for now, this has been the story behind the families of the Dimitrescus, the Beneventos, the Moreaus, and the Heisenbergs, also known as the 4 lords, who served the terrifying cult leader that was Mother Miranda. And that is all for now. I want to say a huge thank you to you for watching this video, as well as my amazing patrons who allow me to make videos like this, including our small fishes, our big fishes, Christopher, AVP Man, Last Persona User, and Arto Creme, our YouTube wise ones, Jambu, Fiery Italian, and Ico the Wolf, our sharks, Whale Such Gaming, and Jason X117, our huge megalodons, Sinus and Jacob Garcia, and our absolutely legendary starfish, Shadow SGT. If you also want to support this channel, you can find the link in the description where you can get access to some merch, which is the first stuff I've ever made, and I'm really happy with it. But if not, please do leave a like, check out my other lore videos, leave a subscribe if you haven't already, as well as a nice comment, as it really does help. But that's all for now. Thanks again, and I shall see you all in the next one. Cheers.